Epstein's pedophile network. Jeffrey Epstein built an empire on secrets. The financier created what prosecutors called a vast sex trafficking operation that ensnared underage girls. His private island in the Caribbean became known as a place where the powerful came to indulge in crimes that would destroy ordinary lives. For decades, he operated in plain sight, moving between Manhattan townhouses and tropical retreats, while carefully constructing a network that protected itself through mutual compromise. Flight logs leaked years before his arrest. Those records showed presidents, princes, and tech moguls traveling on his private jet, nicknamed the Lolita Express, by investigators who understood what the flights represented. The names on those manifests created a web of association that no amount of money could erase. When the logs went public, the questions started. Who knew what? Who participated? Who turned a blind eye? Every name became a liability, and every trip a potential scandal. The leaked documents revealed a pattern of recruitment that was both systematic and chilling. Young women, many still in high school, were approached at shopping malls, schools, and beaches. They were offered money for massages and then gradually drawn into a world where boundaries dissolved and escape became difficult. Epstein used his wealth to create incentives and his connections to create fear. Girls who tried to leave were reminded of how powerful his friends were and how little their complaints would matter. Court documents unsealed in 2019 detailed allegations from dozens of victims. The papers described a system where young women were recruited, abused, and then pressured to bring in others. Each victim became a recruiter under a pyramid scheme designed to supply fresh targets. Epstein used his wealth to create a machine that operated across state lines and international borders. The leaked files showed payments, travel records, and communications that mapped out years of alleged crimes. Bank transfers correlated with flight schedules. Phone records showed coordination between properties. The documentary evidence built a timeline that prosecutors could follow from New York to New Mexico to the Virgin Islands. Financial records revealed something else that the leaks made impossible to ignore. Epstein managed money for billionaires, but the source of his own wealth remained murky. He claimed to manage fortunes for clients who demanded anonymity, but investigators found few traces of legitimate investment activity. Leaked documents suggested he used his knowledge of his clients' secrets as leverage. He positioned himself as someone who knew too much to be abandoned. That strategy worked until the leaks made his operation too visible to ignore. The relationship between Epstein and powerful men became a subject of intense scrutiny once the leaks accelerated. Photographs showed him with presidents and prime ministers. Emails revealed casual correspondence about meetings and favors. Phone logs documented hundreds of calls between Epstein and men, who later claimed they barely knew him. The leaked evidence made those denials look weak. It forced powerful people to explain relationships they had assumed would stay private. His arrest in July 2019 followed years of leaked documents building public pressure. Victims had filed lawsuits that created public records. Journalists had published investigations that named names and described patterns. The legal system had given him a controversial plea deal in 2008 that let him serve just 13 months in a private wing of a county jail with work release privileges. But the leaked details of that arrangement created public outrage. People read the plea agreement and saw how money and connections had bought an outcome that ordinary defendants could never imagine. By the time federal prosecutors arrested him again, there was no more room to hide. He died in his cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in August 2019. Officials ruled it suicide by hanging. The circumstances raised immediate questions that turned into conspiracy theories that refused to die. Cameras that should have been recording malfunctioned at the critical moment. Guards who were supposed to check on him every 30 minutes had fallen asleep and falsified records to cover their failure. A man who held secrets about the world's most powerful people was found dead before he could testify or negotiate a plea deal that might have named co-conspirators. The leaked documents that had already surfaced continued to shape investigations and destroy reputations long after his death. Ghislaine Maxwell, his longtime associate, was arrested and convicted of sex trafficking charges based partly on evidence that had been leaking for years. Prince Andrew faced civil litigation from a victim whose story had been public since before Epstein died. Les Wexner, the billionaire founder of Victoria's Secret, had to explain financial arrangements with Epstein that leaked documents showed were far more extensive than he had previously admitted. The leaks did not stop with Epstein's death. They multiplied as investigators seized his computers and files, and as victims continued to come forward with documents and recordings they had kept as insurance. Cotton's crypto Ponzi. Gerald Cotten ran Quadriga CX, once Canada's largest cryptocurrency exchange. He told customers their money was safe in cold storage wallets protected by military-grade encryption. Behind the scenes, he was running what would later be described as a Ponzi scheme that cost investors $250 million. He presented himself as a crypto visionary who understood the technology better than traditional bankers. His customers believed him because he spoke their language and because the industry was too new for most people to know what questions to ask. The first hint of trouble came when Cotten died suddenly in India in December 2018. He was only 30 years old and had been traveling with his wife on their honeymoon. The official cause was complications from Crohn's disease, a condition he had managed for years. His widow announced that he alone controlled the passwords to the cold wallets holding customer funds. Without those passwords, she said, the money was gone forever. She claimed he had never shared access because he believed in absolute security through sole custody of private keys. Customers did not believe it. They hired investigators and forensic accountants and demanded access to company records. What those experts found was disturbing and comprehensive. Leaked trading records showed Cotten had been creating fake accounts on his own platform for years. He used those accounts to inflate trading volume and give the appearance of a thriving business with deep liquidity. The fake accounts also let him take real customer deposits and trade them away on external exchanges. When those trades went bad, he simply credited the fake accounts with imaginary cryptocurrency to balance the books. Court filings revealed the extent of the fraud in detail that would have remained hidden without the death that forced creditors to look closely. Cotten had moved customer funds into his personal accounts and used them to fund a lifestyle far beyond what his legitimate business income could support. He bought real estate, including multiple properties in Nova Scotia. He acquired expensive cars and a yacht. He and his wife traveled frequently and stayed at luxury hotels. The leaked financial records showed a man systematically looting the company he was supposed to protect, while maintaining the appearance of a successful businessman. Investigators traced transactions on the blockchain that proved there was never enough cryptocurrency to cover customer balances. The cold wallets that were supposed to hold hundreds of millions in Bitcoin and Ethereum were nearly empty and had been for months before his death. Some wallets had been drained years earlier, with the funds moving through tumblers and mixers designed to hide the trail. Leaked blockchain data showed funds moving out of Quadriga CX wallets and into exchanges where they were converted to cash and then transferred to Cotton's personal bank accounts. The death itself became suspicious once the financial picture emerged. Customers and investigators questioned whether Cotten had faked his death to escape prosecution and live off the stolen funds. His widow said she had his body cremated in India before returning to Canada with the ashes. That decision made it impossible to verify the death through an independent autopsy. The leaked emails and financial records kept raising questions that a closed casket could not answer. Some customers tracked down the hospital in India, where he supposedly died, and found record-keeping that seemed incomplete. Others noted that India was a country where documentation could be purchased and identities could be obscured. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police investigated but never charged anyone with fraud. Creditors recovered only a tiny fraction of the lost funds. Cotton's widow cooperated with investigators and surrendered some assets, but maintained she had no knowledge of the fraud. The leaked documents told a different story about a couple who lived well beyond their means and who made financial decisions that suggested they both understood where the money was coming from. The case remains technically open but realistically closed. The money is gone, and whether Cotton is dead or living under a new identity, somewhere, remains a question that leaked evidence suggests, but cannot definitively answer. Mushagians' CIA tweet. Nikolai Mushagian was a cryptocurrency developer who helped create decentralized finance protocols that moved billions of dollars. He was worth millions and moved in circles where paranoia about government surveillance was common, but usually expressed in private channels. On October 28, 2022, he posted a tweet that would become his last public statement, and the most damaging leak of his own fears. The tweet was specific and alarming. He wrote that the CIA and Mossad and pedo elite were running some kind of sex trafficking entrapment blackmail ring out of Puerto Rico and the Caribbean islands. He said he thought they were going to kill him. The message named intelligence agencies and suggested a conspiracy that sounded extreme even in crypto circles where distrust of authority runs deep. He did not elaborate or provide evidence. He simply stated his belief and his fear as if documenting them might provide protection, or at least leave a record. Hours later, Mushagian was found dead on a beach in Puerto Rico. He had drowned in the surf at Condado Beach in San Juan. The official report called it an accident, with no signs of foul play. Local authorities said he appeared to have gone swimming alone and gotten caught in rough water. There were no witnesses to what happened. His body was discovered by someone walking the beach the next morning. Friends and followers online immediately connected his death to the tweet he had posted just before he died. The leaked tweet became evidence in the court of public opinion, where standards are lower and speculation fills the gaps that investigations leave empty. People who knew Mushagian said he had been worried about threats for months. Some said he had been investigating connections between powerful figures and criminal networks, and that he believed he had uncovered something dangerous. Others dismissed the tweet as the paranoid rambling of someone who spent too much time online reading conspiracy theories and seeing patterns that did not exist. The truth remained unclear, but the timing was impossible to ignore and impossible to explain away. What made the case unusual was that Mushagian had leaked his own secret. He had put his fears into public view before anything happened to him. That gave his death a narrative that investigators could not easily dismiss, even if they found no supporting evidence. The tweet forced questions about who he feared and what he knew, and whether his paranoia was justified or manufactured. It made a drowning on a beach look less like an accident and more like a warning to others who might know too much or ask too many questions. The crypto community treated the death as suspicious from the moment the news broke. Forums filled with speculation about who might have wanted him silenced. Some pointed to his work on financial systems that threatened traditional power structures and central bank control. Others noted his connections to people who had also died under strange circumstances, including other developers who had worked on privacy-focused cryptocurrencies. The leaked tweet remained the centerpiece of every theory. It was a document that turned a beach tragedy into a conspiracy that refused to die even as investigators closed the case. Intelligence analysts who study cryptocurrency noted that Mushagian had worked on technologies that governments found threatening. Decentralized finance removes intermediaries that law enforcement uses to track money laundering and terrorist financing. Privacy coins make it nearly impossible to trace transactions. Mushagians' work contributed to systems that could undermine financial surveillance. Whether that made him a target, or whether he simply drowned while swimming alone, remains a question that the leaked tweet keeps alive. McClendon's auction rigging. Aubrey McClendon built Chesapeake Energy into one of the largest natural gas producers in America through aggressive deal-making and huge bets on drilling technology. He was a billionaire who lived large in Oklahoma City, where he owned part of the NBA team, and built a campus for his company that rivaled corporate headquarters in much bigger cities. In early March 2016, federal prosecutors filed an indictment that accused him of rigging bids on oil and gas leases in a scheme that had operated for years. The charge was conspiracy to suppress competition. Prosecutors said McClendon and others had agreed not to compete against each other in auctions for drilling rights in Michigan. Instead, they would coordinate who would win certain leases, and then divide the profits through side agreements that landowners never saw. The arrangement meant landowners got less money for their mineral rights, and companies like Chesapeake paid lower prices than they would have in a competitive market. It was a scheme that moved millions of dollars from ordinary people to executives who already had everything. The indictment leaked into the press immediately and in detail. Reporters obtained copies and published the allegations within hours. Details about emails and secret meetings filled news reports and cable television segments. McClendon's name was everywhere, and always attached to words like fraud and conspiracy. For a man who had spent decades building a reputation as a bold entrepreneur who took risks and won, the accusations were devastating both personally and professionally. The public pressure was immediate and intense in ways that only high-profile prosecutions create. Chesapeake's stock dropped as investors worried about leadership and legal liability. Lenders reviewed credit lines and asked for meetings to discuss the company's exposure. Board members demanded explanations and started talking to lawyers about their own liability. Partners began to distance themselves, and some terminated contracts rather than risk association with an indicted executive. The leaked indictment had turned McClendon from a business leader into a liability overnight. Legal experts said the case would be difficult to prove because conspiracy charges require evidence of explicit agreements and not just parallel behavior that might have innocent explanations. Prosecutors would need emails or recordings that showed McClendon directly coordinating with competitors. The indictment suggested they had that evidence, but the details remained sealed. McClendon's lawyers prepared to fight and said they would show that competitive markets sometimes produce similar strategies without collusion. The case looked like it would last years and cost millions in legal fees. One day after the indictment became public, McClendon died in a single vehicle crash on a road he drove regularly. His SUV hit a concrete wall at high speed in broad daylight. There were no skid marks, suggesting he had tried to brake or swerve. Investigators said he was driving well over the speed limit when he hit the wall. The impact killed him instantly, and the vehicle burst into flames. The timing raised immediate questions about whether it was an accident or a deliberate act. The Department of Justice moved to dismiss the criminal charges because constitutional protections prevent prosecuting a dead person. Without a defendant, there could be no trial and no verdict. Civil lawsuits continued as landowners still wanted compensation for what they claimed was a scheme that had cost them money. Chesapeake settled some claims quietly and fought others in court. The leaked indictment remained a public record that shaped how people remembered McClendon and how business historians wrote about his legacy. It turned a billionaire into a cautionary tale about what happens when private deals become public evidence. What this episode shows is how exposure can change the end of a story without a final verdict ever being reached. Public documents and leaked files force actions that were once private. They reduce latitude for executives who were used to making decisions without explaining them. They alter trust between partners who need to believe in each other. They reassign power from individuals to lawyers and boards. They can make a final chapter feel more precarious than it might have been, and they can create pressure that changes behavior in ways that investigators will never fully understand. Stern's lavish lover. Edouard Stern was a French banker who managed billions for wealthy families and lived without limits or much concern for conventional boundaries. He moved between Paris and Geneva and surrounded himself with expensive tastes and complicated relationships that mixed business and pleasure in ways that created dependencies and jealousies. In February 2005, he was found dead in his Geneva apartment under circumstances that shocked even investigators who had seen violent crime. He had been shot 4 times. He was tied to a chair and wearing a flesh-colored latex suit that covered his entire body. The scene shocked investigators, and the details that leaked into the press shocked everyone else. Stern had been involved with a woman named Cécile Brossard, who worked as an artist and sometimes a prostitute. She had been his lover, and he had given her extravagant gifts that turned a casual relationship into a financial dependency. Bank records showed transfers of more than $1 million over the course of their relationship. There were payments for apartments, clothes, trips, and living expenses. The ledger read like a private account of favors traded for affection, with each payment creating an expectation and an obligation. Court documents revealed more about the dynamics of the relationship as investigators built a case. Stern had made promises of financial support that he later threatened to withdraw when the relationship became difficult. Messages between the two showed a pattern where passion mixed with calculation, and where neither party was entirely honest about their motives. Brossard depended on his money to maintain a lifestyle she could not afford on her own. Stern enjoyed the control that dependency gave him, and the knowledge that she needed him more than he needed her. When the relationship soured, the threats became real, and the gifts that had once seemed generous now looked like leverage. Prosecutors used the leaked financial records to build their case against Brossard and to establish motive. They argued that she had killed Stern because he was cutting her off financially, and because she feared returning to a life without the luxury he had provided. The money was the motive, and the latex suit, and the careful staging suggested premeditation rather than an impulsive act. This was not a crime of passion committed in the heat of an argument. It was a murder that followed a pattern of financial manipulation and threatened abandonment. The prosecutors had bank statements and messages that they believed proved their theory. Brossard's lawyers argued differently and tried to shift the narrative. They said the killing was impulsive and that it happened during an argument about their relationship. Stern had humiliated her and treated her as property rather than a person. The relationship had been psychologically abusive, and the financial records showed dependence. But they also showed a man who used money to control and demean someone who had limited options. The defense painted Stern as someone who exploited vulnerabilities and who created the conditions that led to his own death. The trial became a public examination of how wealth and desire can create dangerous incentives, and how power imbalances make relationships volatile. A Geneva jury convicted Brossard of unpremeditated murder in 2009 after deliberating on evidence that included financial records and testimony from people who knew both parties. She received 8 years and 6 months in prison. The court also ordered her to pay 1 Swiss franc in symbolic damages to Stern's estate, a gesture that signaled moral condemnation without imposing real financial burden. The verdict did more than assign guilt. It turned private bank transfers into public evidence that anyone could read. It made a billionaire's generosity look like a motive for murder, and it created a narrative about power and sex that became part of how people remembered both Stern and the woman who killed him. The leaked documents did not stop with the trial verdict. Journalists continued to dig into Stern's life and publish details that had been private. His bisexual relationships became tabloid fodder, with photos and stories about parties and encounters. His aggressive business tactics were re-examined by former colleagues who now felt free to talk about deals that had gone wrong and disputes that had been settled quietly. Friends and rivals gave interviews that filled in details about a life lived at extremes where pleasure and risk were intertwined. The financial ledgers that once sat in private files became the basis for a story about power, sex, and violence that no one could forget, and that redefined how the banking world talked about conflicts of interest and personal exposure. Sherman's billion-dollar lawsuit. Barry Sherman built Apotex into one of the world's largest generic drug manufacturers by fighting patent battles and undercutting brand name competitors. He was a billionaire who fought for every advantage in court and in business, and made enemies along the way who remembered slights and grievances. In December 2017, he and his wife Honey were found dead in their Toronto mansion, hanging by belts from a railing near their indoor pool. Police initially called it a murder-suicide based on the scene. Later, after forensic review, they said it was a double homicide staged to look like something else. Before the murders, Sherman had been fighting a massive lawsuit that had consumed time and legal fees for years. His cousins claimed he had cheated them out of ownership in Apotex decades earlier, when the company was still small. They wanted $1 billion in damages and a share of the empire Barry had built. The case had dragged on for years and generated thousands of pages of court documents that leaked details about Sherman's business tactics, his family relationships, and his approach to disputes. Those documents showed a man who did not compromise and who used his wealth to outlast opponents in legal battles. The leaked files showed Sherman's strategy in detail. He used his resources to file countersuits and motions that buried the other side in legal fees and forced them to spend money they did not have. Emails and depositions revealed bitter family disputes and accusations of betrayal that went back decades. The cousins claimed Sherman had promised them a stake in the company when they helped him early on, and then cut them out once Apotex became successful. Sherman said they had no legal claim and were trying to extort him by threatening public embarrassment if he did not pay. The court documents made private grievances public and turned a family business dispute into a spectacle. The lawsuit had become public knowledge long before the murders. Business partners knew about it, and some questioned whether the distraction was affecting Sherman's focus. Competitors watched the case and looked for signs of weakness they could exploit. Journalists covered the hearings and wrote profiles that portrayed Sherman as both brilliant and ruthless. The leaked details painted him as someone who made enemies and did not back down even when settling might have been cheaper and easier. That reputation followed him and shaped how people interpreted what happened next. Investigators looked at the lawsuit as a possible motive after the bodies were found. They examined whether someone connected to the legal fight might have wanted revenge or might have stood to benefit from Sherman's death. The billion-dollar claim meant there were people with financial reasons to want the case resolved and Sherman removed from the picture. The leaked court documents gave police a list of names and grievances to investigate, and a trail of people who had reasons to be angry. The case remains unsolved years later, despite a massive investigation and a large reward. Police have said they believe the Shermans were murdered by multiple people who planned the crime carefully and staged the scene to mislead investigators. No arrests have been made, and no suspects have been publicly named. The leaked lawsuit documents continue to shape theories about who might have wanted them dead and why. Financial disputes that were once private court matters became public evidence in a murder investigation that refuses to close. Every document that leaked during the lawsuit is now read as potential evidence of motive, and every person named in those documents has been scrutinized by investigators looking for connections to the crime. Marwan's spy memoir. Ashraf Marwan moved between Cairo and London and lived a life that blurred the line between business, politics, and espionage in ways that made him valuable and dangerous to multiple governments. He was an Egyptian billionaire with close ties to political leaders through his marriage to the daughter of President Nasser. He also had connections to intelligence agencies that used him as a source during Cold War tensions and Middle East conflicts. In June 2007, he fell from the balcony of his London apartment in Mayfair. The fall killed him instantly. Investigators called it suspicious, but could not prove murder and could not rule out suicide or accident. Before his death, Marwan had been working on a memoir that reportedly contained details about his role as a spy during some of the most sensitive moments in Middle East history. The manuscript was said to include names of intelligence officers, details of operations, and explanations of how he provided information to Israel while working for Egypt. Some intelligence analysts believed he had been one of Israel's most valuable assets, providing warnings about Egyptian military plans before the Yom Kippur War. Others thought he was a double agent who played both sides and fed information that suited his own agenda rather than serving any single master. The leaked allegations about his spy work had circulated for years in books and articles by intelligence historians. Some portrayed him as a hero who prevented wars. Others called him a traitor who sold out his country. The memoir was supposed to settle the question by giving Marwan's own account of what he did and why, but the manuscript disappeared after his death. Family members said it had been in his apartment and that it contained names and details that powerful people did not want made public. The missing pages became the center of conspiracy theories about who had taken them and whether Marwan had been killed to prevent publication. The core question about the memoir is whether it ever existed in a form that could damage anyone. Some people who knew Marwan said he talked about writing it for years, but never committed details to paper. Others said they had seen drafts, and that the content was explosive enough to threaten intelligence operations and political careers. The leaked claims about the memoir created a narrative of a man who knew too much and who died before he could tell his story. Whether that narrative is accurate or whether Marwan himself encouraged it as a form of protection remains unclear. Court papers and leaked intelligence reports painted a picture of a man who lived on the edge of multiple dangerous worlds. Marwan had access to sensitive Egyptian government information through his family connections. He used that access to build a business empire that traded on relationships and insider knowledge. He also used it to trade secrets with foreign agencies in exchange for money and protection. The leaked details never provided clear proof of his loyalties or his ultimate motives. They did show a man who had enemies on multiple continents and who operated in spaces where betrayal could come from any direction. Witnesses said Marwan had expressed fear for his life in the weeks before he died. Some recalled conversations where he said he believed agents were following him and that he needed to be careful. Others dismissed those claims as paranoia from someone who had spent too long in the shadow world of intelligence. The balcony he fell from was high enough that survival was impossible. Investigators found no signs of a struggle in the apartment. The door had been locked from the inside. Those facts suggested suicide or accident to some investigators. The leaked spy allegations and the missing memoir suggested murder to others who believed powerful interests had reason to silence him. The case closed without answers and without resolution. The memoir never surfaced in any form that could be verified. The leaked documents about Marwan's intelligence work remained scattered across news reports, books, and files that intelligence agencies keep classified. They created a narrative of a man caught between governments and secrets, someone who tried to serve multiple masters, and who may have been killed when he became more liability than asset. That narrative turned a fall from a balcony into a mystery that intelligence historians still debate, and that leaks keep alive even though the key evidence disappeared with the man who fell. Getty's cheap ransom. J. Paul Getty III was 16 when he was kidnapped in Rome in July 1973 by members of an Italian crime organization. The kidnappers demanded $17 million from one of the world's richest families. They held him for months in harsh conditions in the mountains of southern Italy. When the family hesitated to pay and tried to negotiate a lower amount, the kidnappers cut off his right ear and sent it to a newspaper with a note warning that they would continue cutting unless the money arrived. The public learned that J. Paul Getty, the teenager's grandfather and family patriarch, had refused to pay the full ransom when it was first demanded. He argued that if he paid once, all 14 of his grandchildren would become targets for similar kidnappings. He eventually agreed to pay $2,200,000, which was the maximum amount that would be tax-deductible as a business loss. For the remaining amount needed to reach the kidnappers' reduced demand, he loaned the money to his son, the boy's father, at 4% interest, to be repaid over time. Those details leaked through court documents, family accounts, and statements from lawyers handling the case. They shocked people who could not imagine negotiating over a grandchild's life or demanding repayment of money used to save him. The leaked information about the loan at interest became especially notorious and damaged the Getty family reputation perhaps more than any business scandal could have. It made the richest man in America look cold and calculating, someone for whom every transaction, including ransoms, had to follow proper financial principles. It turned a family tragedy into a public relations disaster that overshadowed the Getty name for generations. The boy was released after the reduced ransom was paid in November 1973. He survived, but the trauma marked him for life in ways that no amount of money could fix. He struggled with addiction to drugs and alcohol as he tried to cope with memories of captivity and the knowledge that his family had bargained over his value. In 1981, he suffered a massive stroke brought on by years of substance abuse. The stroke left him paralyzed and unable to speak clearly. He lived for 30 more years in declining health, cared for by staff paid by the family fortune, but never fully recovering the life that had been stolen from him. The leaked ransom details followed him through all those years. Every article about the family mentioned the kidnapping and the ear and the cold financial calculation that had determined how much he was worth. The publicity around the kidnapping changed how people saw the Getty family and how the family saw itself. Wealth that had once seemed enviable now looked like a curse that attracted danger and separated family members with insurmountable walls of money and resentment. The leaked financial arrangements showed that even vast fortunes did not guarantee protection or compassion. Family disputes over money became public knowledge as relatives fought in court over trusts and estates. Getty's own children dealt with the aftermath of his addiction and disability while managing complex financial structures that their grandfather had created to minimize taxes. The leaked documents had revealed not just the ransom, but an entire approach to family relationships where money was the primary language and emotional connections were secondary considerations. Getty died in 2011 after decades of suffering. Obituaries mentioned the kidnapping and the ransom as the defining events of his life. The leaked details had become the story that everyone remembered. They overshadowed any achievements or private moments of happiness. A boy who should have inherited power and comfort instead became a symbol of how money can fail to buy the things that matter most, and how secrets that leak can define a life more powerfully than anything the person does themselves. Taran's sanctions busting. Vyacheslav. Taran was a Russian billionaire who made his fortune in cryptocurrency by founding trading platforms that moved billions of dollars across borders with minimal oversight. He created exchanges that let users trade anonymously and move large sums without the scrutiny that traditional banks imposed. In November 2022, he died in a helicopter crash near Monaco. The weather was clear. The helicopter was well maintained. The crash killed Taran and the pilot. A third passenger who had been scheduled to fly with them had canceled at the last minute. Before the crash, Taran had been named in multiple reports about Russian oligarchs evading Western sanctions that were imposed after the invasion of Ukraine. Leaked documents showed his companies had moved money through networks designed to hide ownership and destination. Financial journalists who specialized in tracking dark money believed he was helping other wealthy Russians keep their assets out of reach of Western governments that wanted to freeze them. The allegations had put him on watch lists maintained by law enforcement agencies in multiple countries, and made him a target for investigators trying to enforce sanctions. Financial records leaked through investigative journalism showed Taran using cryptocurrency platforms to bypass traditional banking systems that governments could monitor and control. His exchanges allowed users to trade without revealing their identities, and to move funds across borders without triggering the usual reporting requirements. That anonymity made his services attractive to people who wanted to avoid sanctions or hide wealth from tax authorities. Leaked emails and messages suggested he knew his clients included people on government blacklists, and that he took steps to help them conceal their activities rather than comply with regulations. The crash raised immediate suspicion among people who followed Russian business and intelligence operations. Colleagues noted that other Russian businessmen with ties to the Kremlin had died in unusual circumstances after falling out of favor or becoming liabilities. Some had fallen from windows. Others had died in accidents that were ruled natural causes despite suspicious timing. Taran's death fit a pattern that intelligence analysts recognized even if they could not prove it. The passenger who canceled at the last minute fueled speculation that someone knew the helicopter was unsafe. Investigators found no evidence of sabotage in the wreckage, but they also found no clear mechanical explanation for why the helicopter went down. The pilot was experienced, the weather was good, the flight should have been routine. The lack of obvious explanation left room for theories about sophisticated sabotage that would be difficult to detect after a crash and fire. Leaked intelligence reports suggested Taran had become a liability to powerful interests. He knew too much about how money moved between Russia and the West during a time when sanctions were supposed to cut off those flows. He had records of transactions that could implicate powerful people in sanctions violations and money laundering. Some analysts believed he was killed to prevent him from cooperating with Western investigators, who were offering deals to Russian businessmen willing to provide information. Others thought the crash was simply a tragic accident that conspiracy theories had inflated into something more sinister. The leaked documents about sanctions evasion continued to circulate after his death and provided a roadmap for investigations. They showed a web of shell companies and nominee directors that Taran had used to protect client assets and hide the true owners. Law enforcement agencies used those documents to trace money and freeze accounts that had been hidden behind layers of corporate structures. What had been private business became public evidence that fueled prosecutions and diplomatic disputes. A helicopter crash that might have been an accident became another chapter in a story about billionaires who die when their secrets become too dangerous to keep and when their knowledge threatens people with more power than they have. The leaked financial records ensured that even after death, Taran's network would be exposed and his clients would face scrutiny they had paid to avoid: Lee's extortion affair. Thomas H. Lee was a private equity legend who pioneered the leveraged buyout strategy that reshaped American corporate ownership. He made billions buying companies, loading them with debt, cutting costs, and selling them for profits that made him one of the most successful dealmakers of his generation. He was a fixture in finance circles and a major philanthropist whose name appeared on buildings at universities and cultural institutions. In February 2023, he was found dead in his New York office from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He was 78 years old. Before his death, details about personal troubles had leaked into the press in ways that created pressure Lee was not accustomed to facing. Reports suggested he had been involved in an extramarital affair that led to an extortion attempt by someone who threatened to expose the relationship unless Lee paid money to keep it quiet. The allegations had created stress and legal complications as Lee tried to determine how to handle threats while protecting his reputation and family. Friends said he had been dealing with the fallout privately while trying to maintain his public persona as a successful businessman and philanthropist. Business problems had also surfaced that added to the pressure. Some of Lee's recent deals had not performed well as economic conditions changed. Partners were asking hard questions about returns and strategy that they had not questioned during earlier decades of success. Leaked internal documents showed tensions within his firm as younger partners pushed for changes and as investors reconsidered their commitments. The combination of personal scandal and professional pressure created a situation that friends said weighed heavily on someone who had always projected confidence and control. The leaked details about the extortion attempt were especially damaging because they suggested vulnerability in a man who had built his career on appearing invincible. Extortion works by threatening to reveal secrets that would cause reputational or financial harm if exposed. The fact that someone thought Lee had secrets worth paying to protect raised questions about what else might be hidden and whether other aspects of his carefully managed public image might be false. That uncertainty damaged relationships and trust in ways that went beyond the specific allegations. Colleagues said Lee had been dealing with depression in his final years. The personal and professional pressures had taken a toll on someone who had spent decades succeeding at nearly everything he attempted. The leaked information about his private life had made a difficult situation worse by removing the privacy that wealthy people usually rely on to manage problems away from public view. When someone at his level faces public exposure, the consequences ripple through every part of life in ways that are hard to contain or control. Boards reconsider appointments when scandal touches a member. Charities distance themselves from donors whose names might attract unwanted attention. Friends become cautious.